to make, and I'm trying to make these 3 points directly related to the subject of the conference, which is talking about democracy. My first point. Democracy is necessarily rules-based. This is the point of departure of the 3 things I'm going to say. In our countries, rules-based starts with constitutions. It starts with rules as to how elections are going to be held. It starts with roles and responsibilities for the victors, but it also provides a recognition of opposition. We live in a very rules-based democracy system. And looking at the title for today's conference, we will lose democracy if we lose this rules-based approach. This brings me to the issue of rules-based working in international societies. We've had a rules-based approach to European security for the last several decades, building upon Helsinki, building upon important agreements made in the 1990s, built upon a very recent NATO-Russia Council, rules-based, rules-based. Some of these rules, in the same sense that we were hearing this morning from those who study democracies, we see a diminishment of democracies and freedom in the world. We've seen a diminishment of rules-based behavior in the international community. That's my first message. This is a bad message. Second, if we believe in rules-based approach, then we have to be strong and stand up for it. What NATO has been doing with Georgia, what NATO has been doing with Ukraine, is standing tall and trying to deter the type of further erosion of the rules-based approach to international security. We've done this 2 ways. We've stood tall with self-confidence by showing visible assurance means. More troops, more capable, more ready troops have been sent and are being sent to parts of Europe where they were not stationed before, both in terms of exercises and readiness, so that we can show we believe in this rules-based approach. We will not be intimidated by those who want to break it. In Georgia specifically, we're very happy there will be a joint training and evaluation center approach, which is going to fortify our very good relationships with Georgia already. My third point, we have not sought to isolate Russia. Quite to the contrary, we're disappointed by what we see from the Russian leadership. We would hope that Russia sees this as they isolating themselves. That is the way we believe the international community sees what they have done. The activities we see in terms of quick exercises, in terms of the disinformation that has characterized Russian propaganda, all of these things serve only one purpose, and that is to isolate Russia itself. In closing, keeping within 4 minutes, we believe that a rules-based approach to international security is the only approach. NATO will stand behind all of the countries who believe in that, and we will be acting with that goal in mind. Thanks very much.
That was an extraordinary model for the rest of the panel members. Our second speaker is Mr. Janos Herman, who is the ambassador of the EU.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at this distinguished conference. I'll try to be equally brief, although when you speak about the European Union, it is always a challenge to be brief. what I would like to speak about is first about the EU's general role in building up security and prosperity in Europe, and after it about the political moment, and then just some words about Russia and also this region, Georgia. First, you know quite well that the European Union in itself has become a model of building democracy, prosperity and stability in Europe. First, in the European Union among member states. Second, through the process of enlargement that probably was one of the most successful attempts of transformation of societies in history. And third, also around the European Union itself, engaging with our neighbors, through mainly by the European neighborhood policy and multilateral frameworks such as the Eastern Partnership. We feel that this model has effectively promoted democracy, stability, and prosperity inside the EU, the enlargement area, and in the neighborhood. Here I also would like to say that the EU has been working really, just to use the word Ted used, in a rule-based model, step by step, using all EU instruments. So it was a comprehensive effort that contained elements of approximation to the EU, elements of opening up markets, elements of promoting mobility, people-to-people contacts, and also elements of applying security and defense policy. About the moment, 2014-2015 is really a time when this model has been put at certain challenges. Challenges in the East, and this has been mentioned, the crisis in Ukraine, steps undertaken by Russia, and also challenges in the southern neighborhood of the European Union. And I don't want to go, you know quite well the situation in some of the North African and Middle Eastern countries. So we are in a process of evaluating the European neighborhood policy. We hope that this process will produce results by the end of the year, and there will be probably important lessons to draw from the experiences of the last months and years. I would like to say that we take this as an open process, and we encourage very much our partners, in particular our Georgian interlocutors, to be part in this reassessment of the European neighborhood policy. I would also like to repeat what Ted said about Russia. The European attitude, the EU attitude towards Russia has been open from the very start. Participation, the possibility of Russia to engage in the neighborhood policy was offered to Russia when the policy itself was conceived. And this offer has been maintained throughout the years. Meanwhile, we opened several frameworks of engagement and cooperation with the Russian Federation over the years. And this, of course, remains a possibility, and hope very much that Russia and us both will benefit in the coming years. Of course, we now have to draw our own lessons about what happened last year in Ukraine, and you see that the European Union is consistently first supporting Ukraine, making it very clear that it does not accept steps that would change borders, violate the sovereignty of the country, especially by military means. And at the same time, of course, we are just saying that possibilities and the perspective of continuing cooperation in Russia will be and remain open should we overcome the present difficulties. About Georgia, I would just like to say that for us, Georgia is and will remain a very important partner in the overall European context. And we are developing our relation now on a new base, the association agreement with Georgia, which is quite an ambitious agreement. And the European Union, and I would like to say all of us who are here in Tbilisi, look forward very much to strengthen cooperation with your country based on the association agreement. And we are entirely convinced that progress in the association agreement will strengthen democracy, prosperity and stability in Georgia, and will be a very important contribution to strengthening also democracy and prosperity in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our third speaker will be Mr. Alex Petriashvili, who is the Secretary General of the Free Democratic Party.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to address this distinguished audience and to be at this panel. Let me start with two news. One is bad news and another is very good news. First is that the Minister of Foreign Affairs is missing, and we were hoping that she would lay out her plans and the government's plans how to achieve the success in Riga. But we have very good news, and Commissioner Füle is here with us, and let me welcome him personally, who has advocated and is still advocating for the tunnel, light in the end of the tunnel for the countries who are aspiring to become the members of the European Union. And let me build on this very great statement that Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine are expecting very soon that the steps made by the European Union will be another stimulus for these countries in their fight, in their struggle for becoming the full members of the European Union. The association agreement certainly is not the end of the cooperation between Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine with the European Union, but in these very hard times, especially for Ukraine and for all of us, definitely, we all need new messages, new signals, new stimulus, and we hope very much that in Riga there will be a success story for Georgia as well as for the European Union, and we will get the visa-free travel decision for Georgia. Why it is so important? Let me very briefly tell you an example for Moldova. When Moldovans have received the similar decision, Transnistrians started hundreds and hundreds crossing all the barriers, obstacles organized by the FSB, GRU people in the occupied territories and getting the Moldovan passports. This is a very important message would be for Abkhaz and Ossetians, and they are very much interested in getting this signal for Georgia. We are expecting that the European perspective will be granted to Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. This is merit-based decision. Ukraine is going through the very painful reforms. Georgia is also leading in the reforms in the region. There are some shortcomings, but we have to move forward, and we expect that it will be adequately reflected in the decisions made by the European Union. The Riga summit shortly will be followed by the end of this year with the NATO ministerial meeting, which is not less important. We are all expecting that the opening of the training center, or according to the some government officials, as a fitness center, or whatever you can call it. But it is the military infrastructure and it is the training center and evaluation which will lead us to the NATO membership. Will be preceding, I hope very much, the decisions made at the NATO ministerial by the end of this year. A very important decision should be made regarding other aspirant countries, and we do not want to give anyone, in particular to our northern neighbors, to Russians, that Georgia is out of the radars from the NATO decisions. I don't want to hear the self-excluding statements. Of course, we are very welcoming always these statements about the reiteration of the NATO's decision on Georgia's membership in NATO, but when we hear that there will be no new enlargements in upcoming future, there should be no new members in NATO for a while, It makes us nervous and makes happy Russians and their sponsored mushrooming NGOs, as well as some political forces who are openly propagating for the Eurasian Union. Unfortunately, some in the ruling coalition. And last but not least, my colleague and friend, former defense minister and the chairman of the Free Democrats Party, Irakli Alassania, made it very clear that today we are not at the immediate military confrontation with the Russian Federation, but our territories are occupied. The Russians are in Ukraine, and we all know about the possible plans regarding further developments, military developments. So it is time to make the decisions for the international community to give the lethal military assistance to both to Ukraine and to Georgia. Because if we don't defend our security and stability with defense capabilities, there will be no rule-based democracy tomorrow. We have to defend it today to get the rule-based democracy tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Ambassador Kęstutis Jankauskis, who is the head of the European Union Monitoring Mission in Georgia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues. In the introduction today, we heard about the democratic stagnation or erosion since 2006. Indeed, looking into the last year, I think we all saw fundamental shifts in the security on our continent. It started with the wake-up call here in 2008. We pushed the snooze button, and I think by now we clearly understand that what happened is not a thunderstorm, but it's the climate change, and we are still in the midst of that. I think in the last year, realization in Europe grew that security is not given, that you have to stand up, and that we have threats, different threats, but threats coming both from the east and from the south. And it's unpleasant news, but it's for us to stand up to that challenge if we want to protect our way of life. It's about our unity and our cohesion. Question is, are we ready to stand up? Are we ready not to draw also the dividing lines ourselves? And are we ready to extend our hands to the partners who are willing to be like us and be together? I think EU is doing okay, but the challenge is not over, and it will be harder. So it's for us to sustain that, sustain our cohesion. And I not accidentally started by saying us, it's us in Europe, because it's primarily in our hands. And there are moments when we need to show leadership. This conference and this panel is about leadership. My second message is that European Union Monitoring Mission is the product of that wake-up call which happened in 2008. It is a commitment of the European Union towards Georgia to be on the ground. We are hundreds of European monitors from 24 different countries. We have over 100 of the great local staff. We have done since 2008 more than 47,000 patrols. We are here, we will be here. Last year our mandate was extended for 2 years. I think what happened in Ukraine really changed some minds, and for better understanding that this mission here is still needed. We are part of the European family, and as Janos spoke, there is much more to that. But at least EUMM being on the ground is here and on the ground. And I noticed what President said in previous panel, that Europe has to be here before hostilities start. So we are here. We saw also in this recent crisis that there are new threats, there are new ways of conducting the war. We call it a hybrid we underline the second word, which is hybrid warfare. It's the warfare. And I think EU, with its comprehensive approach, is well suited to fight these new threats. But what we need to do is, first of all of us, domestically, nationally, to build the resilience. And that resilience means building democratic institutions. It means strengthening institutions, empowering people, creating that resilience, implementation capacity, administration capacity, and functioning institutions. And sometimes there is a temptation to think that against these threats, you would need more consolidated power and more stronger way. And democracy is vulnerable. Yes, they are, but there is no better defense than really well-functioning democratic institutions. So I believe there is a window here in Georgia to build and strengthen these institutions, and Georgia has got all array of the tools given by the European Union to do that. My last message is that we also heard in the previous panel is the Georgian institutions and leaders are ready to work together as a team. And I believe there is no other way as to work like that. If we can work as a team of 24 European nations in the UMM, I think Georgia can work as a team as well, and I saw that readiness. Frankly, ideally, the country and the leadership would agree on a set of overarching priorities on Euro-Atlantic integration, on security policy, engagement policy. I would probably add energy policy. And here it's their way of showing that leadership, and let me say that I am optimistic that it is in our hands, and if we show that leadership and stand up for the challenge, we will do it, and Georgia can do it as well. And the choice is always between the easier and the right. It's the Harry Potter choice. But I think we need to choose the right. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Mr. Tato Japaridze, who is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Georgian Parliament.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to welcome panelists. And I have only good news. I do not have bad news. And my good news is about that Georgian part of this panel and the Georgians who are in the audience. It's about commitment towards our European and Euro-Atlantic values. We're committed. We understand it's not easy. It's long-term. It would take time. It would take, a certain amount of wisdom. It would take, patience. But all of us are committed towards our NATO, European Union expectations, agenda, and I hope that with this consolidation with each other, we argue, we disagree, we sometimes even fight with each other on different internal issues. But I think that regarding Europe and Euro-Atlantic community, Georgia is unified. But there is one problem, which is just about citizens of Georgia, because we frequently boast about over 80% of citizens of Georgia supporting NATO and the European Union. But traveling from Tbilisi to Kutaisi and from Kutaisi back to Tbilisi and stopping over in some villages, I'd like to frankly tell you that hardly these citizens and villagers have any idea about NATO, association agreement, European Union. So our agenda should be not only work hard, officials, experts, opposition, about Georgia's European Euro-Atlantic integration, but communicate this message to our citizens, because looking at Stefan fully, I remember this conversation with him, because if we speak about implementation of association agreement, it would be not about only governments and parliaments and presidency, but it would be about citizens of Georgia, because association agreement should change Georgia, modernize Georgia internally, and change way of life of citizens of Georgia. Mr. Chairman, you raised the issue of democracy, and I fully agree with you, and Kesos has also talked about that. Democracy, matters very much, and it's one of the central pillars of Georgia's, modernization and Georgia's posture towards NATO and the European Union. But sometimes it looks like to me that, democracy building looks like building a pyramid, from the top. And sometimes it's not the best experiment. So we need to do our best to make democracy, strengthen democratic institutions, to strengthen rule of law, restoration of justice, but to make democracy, way of life for citizens of Georgia. Speaking about, foreign policy, of course, there is no doubt about commitment to our foreign policy trajectory, and it won't change in one night, in 1 week, in 1 month, because all of us are committed, not to change it. But our foreign policy, Georgian government's foreign policy is based, on 3 main pillars, which is, realism, pragmatism, and I would add to that sense of regional realpolitik, which is just not about what we are, which Georgia loves to talk about in abundance, but where we are. So it's not only about Russia. We live in a very troubled, complicated, turbulent neighborhood. It's of course about Russia, but it's not only about Russia. Association agreement and the Cardiff summit. Of course, if you ask me personally, I'm not happy with the Cardiff outcome. I expected more, but it depends on the optimists and the pessimists to judge whether this NATO bottle is half empty or half full. Association agreement, again, it's a unique opportunity for Georgia to not only activate relations with the European Union, and it's about, full membership whenever it happens. Again, it's a very long term process, but it's, again, unique opportunity for Georgia to reform, modernize it internally. And there is one element, to this association agreement I'd like to talk about, is that association agreement, if you ask me, does not belong only to Georgia. It should also be open to our regional partners. It should be open to even Armenians, though they have different political agenda, formally or informally. It should be open. We should try to engage, in different, formats and projects, our Azerbaijani neighbors. And I'd like to tell you, if it is appropriate to speak about that here, that recently I accompanied Speaker of Georgian Parliament in Iran. The first thing the chairman of Iranian Parliament talked to us about and congratulated Mr. Larijani was that I congratulate you with the signing, association agreement. When we asked him why, he said, because it matters for Iran. It's about, trade. It's about unique opportunity to diversify trade and different energy and other issues. So I think it's very unique, momentum. Of course, speaking about democracy again, we are not perfect, we are not ideal, but we're committed to be better. It takes, time. It's about, strengthening institutions. But again, as I started at the beginning, it's just about our irreversible commitment of citizens of Georgia to join NATO, to join European Union whenever it happens. But again, life is very dynamic. Political life is more dynamic. Things, happen. So I wish Georgia be ready whenever it happens and when this window of opportunity is open, and don't let our European or NATO friends tell us, yeah, Georgia had, unique opportunity and you're not again ready. So it's about, making Georgia relevant, capable, democratic state, and let's do our work and wait when this window of opportunity is open and Georgia would enter European Union or NATO. But there is one last point, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to tell you, which disorients us a bit, and it's about our European and Euro-Atlantic colleagues. The messages we receive from time to time is just on the one hand, we support you, our Georgian friends, but on the other hand, you understand that we should not irritate Russians. This kind of approaches disorient, because Russians would be irritated even without association agreement or NATO membership. So be straightforward, be clear-cut. Again, we understand, at least I understand, that NATO, European Union, is a long, term process. But again, but define our agenda in a very clear-cut, way, and believe that Georgians, citizens of Georgia, politicians, experts from different, walks of politics would do their best to join you in this very important, journey towards Europe. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And our last speaker is Mr. Giga Bokaria, who is the Foreign Relations Secretary of the UNM.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to welcome all the distinguished panelists and distinguished guests. Again, I appreciate the chance to speak at this conference, to be at this particular panel. I want to thank the organizers for making this conference happen in Tbilisi, Georgia. One small note, just for the record, the panel's name is Towards Europe Whole, Free and at Peace. In substance, everybody spoke about it, but nobody has mentioned it. But it's a very nice name for a great project. So I just wanted to note that this project, whatever the current troubles are, has been a huge success on one side. I mean, it brought millions of people in most of Eastern Europe out of poverty, out of the misery of Soviet oppression, towards more prosperity, more liberty, more democracy. So great story. The world is better off now than it was 30 years ago, for sure. Even we who have so far failed to enter this important clubs, failed so far to rejoin fully the free world, Georgians, Moldovans, or Ukrainians, we are still better off than we were 30 years ago. So it was a great project, great vision, and it was possible, made possible because there was joint NATO-EU harmonic action. They pushed enlargement in parallel. There was a clear signal by NATO and EU at the time to all the Eastern European former Warsaw Pact societies that if they reform, if they pursue liberal democracy and market reforms, they had a clear path towards rejoining the civilized world and getting their security enhanced, getting their prosperity further enhanced. That was very important. There was clear US leadership, there was clear vision, moral high ground, and true pragmatism, understanding that supporting those nations were helping economically and security-wise other parts of Western Europe and the United States. And I think even most importantly, that policy was preceded by very effective containment policy during the Cold War of Soviet Empire, by Truman Doctrine, who developed and during Reagan years destroyed Soviet Union and made this enlargement possible. So again, it's a clear success. But on the other hand, when we watch what is going on in Ukraine now, the invasion by Russia, what happened in Georgia in 2008, the invasion by Russia, before that and after in Georgia with occupied regions, with Russia defying all the international rules in a blatant and cynical way, one must say something went wrong. And I must say very shortly, because I understand time is short, what went wrong from my point of view, if I dare to say. First, this great project was unfinished. Not all nations in European neighborhood of Soviet Russia, post-Soviet Russia, were given the same chance as other Eastern Europeans to have a clear path and clear signal of acceptance if they deliver on reforms and if they transform themselves. And that includes my country, Ukraine and Moldova. We had our deep failings, and we do even more now, unfortunately, in Georgia, but still there was no clear message that the path was there. There was a premature assumption that post-Soviet Russia was no longer a threat. And hence there were no policies of containment of those instincts which were always present, even when Russia was at the weakest point when NATO enlargement happened. So I think that those were dramatic mistakes which delivered. I mean, how many times we were hearing this simmering message even before the Georgia invasion and after Georgia invasion that NATO enlargement was a reason for trouble, that Russia had legitimate or quasi-legitimate or semi-legitimate reason to be concerned. After the 2008 invasion, when Russia honestly paid a very little price for that, we were hearing from our good friends, and I mean it really, real good friends, that we should de facto forget about NATO and pursue EU association agreement as a viable path. Well, not only it was a disastrous message of benefit towards an aggressor that NATO should be put on the hold, but it was a clear misunderstanding of the challenge, because the assumption was that if NATO is put aside and Georgia transforms otherwise into a European country, Kremlin would be okay with that. Now, after Ukraine, I think nobody pushes this message, but even after Ukraine, when awareness of the challenge have grown immensely and for good reason, I think there are still very worrying signals from the Western capitals. The statements which de facto put on hold NATO enlargement and EU enlargement by major Western European leaders. And those statements are made in a context as a solution to the Ukraine crisis, that the deal must be found with Russia, and that's why this signal must be sent there. The prolonged discussion about delivering the security weapons to Ukraine. Those are very dangerous signals that still there is lack of acknowledgement of the full-blown challenge that Kremlin and Putin poses, not to Ukraine or Georgia or Moldova only, but to the whole concept of the post-Cold War order. Mr. Putin has been very explicit about that as early as 2007 in Munich speech, and then he has acted upon this plan. Now we see that they even try to destabilize neighbors which are already inside the EU and NATO, and this will not stop. So, again, time is short. What, in my humble opinion, should be a pathway forward, and going back to the great vision, great project announced by then Senior President Bush in 1989. There should be a coherent, cross-the-spectrum strategy to contain post-Soviet Russia, Putin's Russia, and defeat it as a geopolitical foe. There should be something like Truman Doctrine. The historic parallel is not exact, but there are some huge similarities with the challenge. There should be, just like in 1989, clear message to Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, those who are willing to join the free world, that there is a pathway, provided that they deliver on liberal democracy reforms and market reforms. Clear message, not cryptic, and especially not the message that Ukraine does not belong to EU, as we have heard, unfortunately, or Georgia, and in NATO. There should be a very serious understanding that the democracy doubles which were mentioned here inside the European countries, inside our societies, pose a real threat. They must be isolated in political life, not prosecuted. Nobody should be prosecuted even for most poisonous ideas, but really isolated. Those ideas of xenophobia and isolation should not be played with serious leaders in serious mainstream political parties. And last but not the least, what we should do on our side, because we need to do something to contribute to our own future, what we should do is we should not be complacent. We should keep our security structures clear from Russian infiltration, which is a serious threat. We should, with all respect, not take seriously even our best friends telling us that cultural exchange programs are the way forward in our relationship with Russia, and this will solve the problem, and dialogue with Putin's Kremlin will solve the problem, because unfortunately this is not serious. We should isolate inside our own political debate, as Mr. Petreshvili has mentioned, those who pursue the fundamentalist Eurasianist xenophobic ideas that Europe, decadent Europe, is a challenge to our family values, identity, and that we should be very clear about them. Again, not prosecute them unless they commit violence. But when the ruling party leaders are the outspoken speakers against NATO integration, they cannot stay in ruling coalition, because otherwise it's a signal that it's okay, politically speaking, to have this message. And that erodes the consensus, which is our main shield in this battle. When the de facto prime minister of the country endorses the fundamentalistic, xenophobic groups and their media outlets as his favorite, when the whole cabinet of ministers gives interview to far-right, fundamentalistic, pro-violent newspapers, this is a dangerous message. When those groups commit violence against minorities and stay unprosecuted, and instead pro-Western opposition like my party, UNM, or Free Democrats are prosecuted because government sees a potential competition there, this is a disastrous message, not only for democracy in general, but for security and for our Euro-Atlantic future. We should be very clear on all of those issues. And last sentence, it's clear, inside our societies and in the world, this great project of Europe, Poland, free and at peace is under threat, but it's alive, and what is even more important, there is no acceptable alternative to this project. Thank you.
Let me begin with one question to the panel, but Mr. Boccaria, I'm following on your remarks, and you actually already gave an answer. So if we went back 30 years and contrasted that with today, there's been astonishing progress. It would have been inconceivable 30 years ago that we'd be sitting in this room having this conversation. 20 years ago, Jacques Delors, the great French political leader, made a comment something like, if Europe is going to widen, it also has to deepen. And that sounded very plausible. I would say if you look at the situation that's taken place over the last several years, we'd have to worry about whether Europe will widen or deepen, and we'd also have to not be particularly confident that NATO will continue to expand. So my question to you is, if Europe doesn't widen and deepen, and if NATO does not expand, what would the optimal policies be for the international community, Europe, the United States, be towards Georgia or the former Soviet Union, Russia more generally? Assuming we're not going to have widening and deepening, which we may not, and we won't have NATO expansion, what should we be doing? So I know this is a kind of question that it's much easier to ask in an academic conference. And since I've been in the government, I know that it's hard to answer these questions, but beyond your talking points.
Well, it's a tough question. I think I would agree if there's no NATO to the Japan-U.S. Security treaty situation. That would give me a confidence of security, if that would be possible, with occupied territories staying out of the protection of the treaty. But more seriously, I think it would be a disastrous perspective if there is a decision made that there will be no vision how to enlarge the free world further. It would put us in a very difficult situation, and the only response that we can have, that we had a long periods of our history when there was no chance and we had to survive and wait for the next window of opportunity. I think, and I'm as biased as I am in evaluating Mr. Putin and Kremlin's goals, that this challenge, which is now visible in Ukraine, in Georgia, in neighborhood, will go further, and it will make it impossible for the rest of the free world not to react to, but it could be much late than it could have happened earlier, yeah? And it could damage the free world and threaten really the future of freedom for a foreseeable period of the time, unless it's taken seriously. And honestly, I don't see an alternative to NATO, in particular NATO, as a security guarantor and US leadership in that context for the whole European continent to be secure. So again, I don't have the response to your question. That's my response.
I'd pick up what is, it's an interesting question, but of course it's a hypothetical question. What if NATO opted not to enlarge any further? I just wanted to reassure not only those who are here, but the fact that NATO has not made such a decision. Quite to the contrary, the Secretary General has reaffirmed and will continue to reaffirm what is the NATO stance. Georgia will become a member of this alliance once Georgia fulfills the conditions for that. The hypothetical question, what if that were not the case, and what type of containment process or what type of other mechanism might emerge? I don't think that's plausible in the short term. I think it's important now we keep some strategic patience in all of this. This isn't going to happen in any case all that quickly. Georgia's on the path to NATO membership. The hypothetical questioning about this, I think, detracts from that very straightforward goal. If we start to say, well, what other configuration, what other construct could we start fiddling with? It's going to please other parties, but it doesn't get us to the goal that we've fixed in 2008. Georgia has a lot of work in front of it to meet all of the conditions, but the NATO alliance stands strong with it. And that's what I was saying when I talked about some of the new initiatives to support the military and to deepen the political consultative process. Somewhat allergic to hypothetical questions.
Thank you. I feel that the question is hypothetical, but of course it's still valid in the sense that either the EU will deepen or not. And of course, either the EU will in the future enlarge or not, and we have to deal then with the potential consequences of both scenarios. And this is obviously very much in our thinking. I would like to say that, just to make it a bit more complex, that probably the EU will deepen in some areas and will not deepen in some others. Probably, and this is clear after the statement made by the President of the Commission, then in the coming years there will be no new entry into the EU, but the enlargement as such is in motion. It's a process, reflection is going on, work is going on. So it's not simply about whether we deepen or not, enlarge or not. The picture is more complex, but at the same time it is clear that this is the time when we would need to make a thorough reflection about our policies for the coming years. And now going to Georgia, because that is in the interest very much among us, it is clear that now we start implementing the association agreement. The European Union is also going through important transformation. I don't say we are a target, but if I would say it, we are a moving target. And at the same time, there are regional aspects, and there is also this association agreement, and I am sure it will take time to implement this agreement. So I feel that it is not so important right now to focus on where you belong. It is important, but even more important to focus on what you are, how you evolve, what you achieve in the transformation of the country, in introducing reforms, in stabilizing democracy in the country. And then with time, the options will clarify themselves, will open gradually. Having said that, it is clear that there must be a reflection in the European Union about further development of our policies. As a matter of fact, the association as such was a reaction to changes. So if further changes will come, probably there will be further reflection about the institutional response to those changes.
Of course, it is a hypothetical question, but of course it needs then rethinking the NATO and EU concepts. I mean, the open door policy for NATO and the EU's agreements that every European country has the right to become the member of the European Union. I hope very much we will never witness that kind of developments in the nearest decades or century. But what I am always telling to the different parts of our society, when I was a minister and now we're going out to the regions and we're talking about the very good example of the Baltic states and other European countries. They were also told that there will be no enlargement. There will be, forget the NATO membership, forget NATO, EU membership. You are independent, how you enjoy your liberty. But they will keep working on reforming the country, and they will keep knocking on the door of NATO and Europe. And they're here. And I believe that we will never discuss this kind of hypothetical questions in future.
Yeah, we'll never answer hypothetical questions, but a few thoughts. I think we should use more term accession, not term expansion, because as far as I know, there is no office in both NATO or the EU which is plotting an expansion. It's a process driven primarily by countries who want to join the free Europe, and that's exactly the project of Europe Whole and Free. And it's primarily driven by countries willing to join. Secondly, I think while we wait for the larger decisions, the window is open for decisions here. And that is the process which is in the hand of any country. And that is exactly what David said in the first panel. Do everything you can not to give an excuse to tell not yet. And exactly, I think Georgia has all the necessary tools right now, and those tools are good for both strengthening institutions, strengthening democracy at home, and getting better prepared. So that window is open, and do what is in your hands rather than worry about what is not in your hands right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with you. Of course, we should be ready. We should work, hard. And as I said in my intervention, I fully agree with you and David that there should not be any excuse whenever it happens, when time comes by, for anybody in Europe, in the United States, to tell us that, window is open and again Georgia is not ready. I also, do not like to answer, a hypothetical question, because if we speak about Georgia, we do not have time for that. Our choice, on a daily level is about bad and worse. If we speak about, short-term, long-term, or mid-term, we do not have, mid-term, long-term, perspectives. It's about our life. It's about, survival. We have, Russian tanks 40 kilometers up here. We are dismembered, occupied. So our life is about, just, short-term opportunities or just failures. We speak about, and I mentioned that I used this term, about strategic patience. And I'd like to disagree with myself, what about, strategic urgency? It's time for strategic urgency when we speak about countries who are in this so-called, gray zone security vacuum area, like Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. I would include, Azerbaijan, include Armenia as well. We want to join NATO and the European Union whenever it happens. We do not want to go back where we used to belong, but how long, my dear friends, can we stay in this suspended animation? And for example, I participated in many NATO Parliamentary Assembly meetings, and I had privilege to pose questions to Secretary General of NATO, previous one and the new one. And my question is, what else Georgia should do? What else? We are in Afghanistan, we are just participating in different NATO, EU operations. We're doing, just building democracy, whatever, with all these, zigzags and, drawbacks. But what else Georgia should do to because, we understand on the one hand, on the other hand, it's very diplomatic, very important. But that's also about the will, because when our dear Baltic friends joined European and Euro-Atlantic, structure, I was in Riga, I remember, and I do not want to mention, of course, name of my interlocutor who told me, that if we speak about membership action plan, we just had 30% of this plan fulfilled. But it was about, European and American, will. Of course, Baltic states have different experience, different history, but, think about Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova in a strategic, context, not about only geography and neighboring, Russia. So I think it's about, strategic urgency, and we need to keep this into our mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few minutes. Questions from the audience?
Thank you. My question concerns the role of the lethal weapons. Alex mentioned it in the security of our region. Well, generally, broadly, Mr. Krasner, and also especially for our region. So, if there is a role in the 21st century for the lethal weapons to provide security, then what hampers provision of modern lethal weapons to the countries which do not have other security umbrellas and so far have to stay on their own? Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. One problem might be that in certain parts of the international community, including epistemic communities, the talk about lethal weapons might sound politically incorrect. The second obstacle could be that maybe there is a Mr. Alassania, former defense minister, was talking that Georgian troops are very well trained, and I have no ground to doubt about it. But what about the leadership? Maybe there is a reluctance from the side of the leadership of Georgia to have such weapons, to demand these weapons, very demandfully, or maybe there is a lack of trust in leadership. So what is the problem in this respect?
It's an important question, and one for which, of course, a NATO official is not going to have a clear reply. It's the position of all of the 28 nations that assistance or provision of lethal weapons is a national decision rather than a decision which would bind or upon which we would have to find consensus. So I return to the basics. The question of lethal weapons and that type of assistance is very much national. I was at the Brussels Forum over the weekend, organized by the German Marshall Fund. And to reply to the second aspect of your question, I would come back to what Victoria Nuland, whom you know, was saying very openly. There is a debate in Washington. There's potentially a debate in other NATO capitals about the wisdom of providing lethal weapons. Some see it as being extremely escalatory. Others see it as being extremely supportive. Once you go down this road, which is a really important political decision, there are consequences one way or the other. As a NATO official, there is no NATO position on this, so I'm answering the question as straightforwardly as I can, but this is for each of the 28 allies to wrestle with, and of course you're referring, I believe, chiefly to a really important decision that lies in Washington.
Thank you. I believe it is really a crucial issue for purely security reasons, though I'm not a real military expert, but even I can take liberty to judge, saying that the ability of Ukraine and Georgia to resist more effectively Russian invasion is a crucial component. Now, that doesn't mean that the argument, because I'm referring now to the argument which is used against it, can you win the war against Russia if they invade full-blown? No, probably, but making it easier for Russia to destabilize Ukraine with less resources, with less damage, it makes, I mean, it's a very unconvincing argument for me in that context. And it has an ideological aspect to that, because we are at the confrontation with Russia, which is not only purely security, but it's the full-blown confrontation, which includes the propaganda confrontation. The message of not delivering to Ukraine in these circumstances defensive weapons is a devastating message. And it weakens politically and ideologically those who defend those choices and strengthens those who are undermining those choices. This is crucial. As for Georgian leadership, I think we have a problem, as the recent events have turned out, that at best our leadership now is ambivalent on this issue, and maybe their position is, let's say, more nice to our best friends in the West, but it doesn't serve Georgia's national interest, not pushing for this crucial component, neither politically nor security-wise.
Yes, next question. Let me do this. Let me go to this side again, and then I'll come to you, and then we'll break.
Thank you. I'm Anna Arganishvili from Civil Society Organization, and my question refers to Mr. Giga. And I think it was mentioned that there are some groups of people who actually are against EU and NATO, and if I don't misheard it, there was a proposal that we should isolate them. So my question is, if we isolate them, if they got violent and underground, and if they become the leverage of Russia or any other countries, is this a good strategy, and what is the experience of dealing with such groups? And my another question is, how do we plan to get to EU and to NATO without women? I don't see any women panelists. I don't see participation of women. I don't see their voice. So what is the role of a woman in peace and security? And let's remember UN Resolution 1325 on that particular issue. Thank you.
I started with the bad news. I said we're missing them.
Yeah, I think that's the only defense that we have, that there was a plan to have a lady at the top of the discussion, but I still accept the problem which exists in Georgia's political and public life in that respect, which is reflected accidentally here too. But the problem is deeper than not having women at this panel in Georgia, unfortunately. But on the first question, when I say isolation, I didn't mean incarceration. I meant that mainstream political forces, there should be a political culture where those who preach violence against minorities, those who especially commit violence or enhance violence, or are tolerant towards those groups which preach hatred, should be excluded from mainstream political cooperation. That doesn't take away from them their fundamental freedom. I'm in favor of not prosecuting even hate speech unless there's a proof that there's an imminent danger of violence. And that's the standard in Georgian legislation if the current government will not change it to pursue the pro-Western opposition in their prosecution quest. But isolating them is necessary. When you have a leader of the fraction ruling coalition coming on TV and saying that NATO is a source of all trouble for Georgia and West is undermining our identity, and this person stays in ruling coalition, and there are mere polite distancing statements saying, oh, it's his point of view, that's a devastating message. When people commit violence and they're not prosecuted, and those people should be incarcerated, and they're not. So what do you mean by underground? Criminals must be either underground or in jail, and those who preach violence should feel that they are political lepra. Again, it's their right to be, but it's our right to ostracize them. Just like it's our right to ostracize those who preach Nazi ideas. And that's because otherwise they will win the debate. Look at Russia, look at some of the countries around us. This is a mainstream debate. These people create groups like Nashi and others, and now we see dangerous parallels in Georgian reality every day. And then they take initiative in moral debate in the country, and then they take charge, and then it's too late, and then it's blood. So in order to prevent that, those who commit criminal acts must be prosecuted. Those who don't commit acts but are clearly preaching the fundamentalistic Eurasianist ideas must be excluded from self-respectful political forces from dialogue. I mean, look, Sweden, a country that I really like. I mean, the new Swedes, no, it's new Finns, what's the name? Swedish Democrats, new party, which is, they're by far European and democratic compared to our fundamentalists. They don't commit violence, but because of their xenophobic views towards immigration, the mainstream European Swedish parties refuse to cooperate with them. And that created a political stalemate, parliamentary stalemate in nearly repeat elections. But why are they doing that? Because that's how the democratic culture is kept intact. And we see the reverse of it in Georgia. Again, I didn't mention it by accident. When a de facto prime minister, then a prime minister, endorses a newspaper who is saying that Hitler did right when he took gays on ships and drowned them, that's the newspaper, and says it's my favorite newspaper, standard bearer for Georgian democracy, it's a verbatim quote. Now, one shouldn't be surprised when these groups pop up and commit violence and hijack the public debate. So again, we have not lost this battle in Georgia, and God forbid, and we hope we're going to win, but it's going to cost us, and it's already costing us. So I'm not ready to accept a slide of step-by-step disaster which might approach. So isolation means ostracization, legitimate ostracization of those kind of forces.
Mr. Japarik.
Thank you very much. Of course, you know, well, I'd like to start from the weapon and go into to disagree, you know, slightly with Giga. Of course, you know, when we speak, I talked about that in my intervention. When we speak about Ukraine, and of course, you know, the world community, international community, NATO, European Union, they're focused on Ukraine and whatever is going on in Ukraine. And there's no doubt about that. We shouldn't assist. We should be focused, concentrated on that. But my message to international community, NATO, including, and first of all, NATO is not the organization who delivers the weapons. It's about, you know, member state countries, as I understand. But my humble request would be just to look at Ukraine not only as a geographic component, but a geostrategic context. Because Ukraine is Georgia, Moldova, and whatever is going on and whatever you want to assist Ukraine, don't keep in mind that Georgia and Moldova as well. Because that's how Mr. Putin operates. We are focused on Ukraine. On the very day we are just talking and making strong statements in the EU or NATO, Putin is annexing, Ossetia and Abkhazia. He's, signing this, illegal, treaties, with them. So everything is going, in parallel way and manner. And again, we need to keep in mind that we are too logical. I mean, Europeans and Americans. You have your own, interpretation of stability, security, economic cooperation, or whatever. Whereas, Mr. Putin, his own, interpretation. He does not care about these, notions of Europeanism or European values and principles. So keep Ukraine in mind, but also, keep Georgia and Moldova and Armenia or Azerbaijan, because Putin's, game plan is about that. It's not only about Ukraine. We had this experience in 2008. You reacted a bit, weak way due to different, reasons. But again, keep us in a strategic, context. Regarding, statements, Giga, of course, people make statements, and we talk about democracy and value of democracy. And of course, we can, punish, we can ostracize, we can expel and this and that, but we're talking about building democracy. People can say some things which I do not agree. I fully disagree with but again, people make statements. I remember,
words matter.
Words matter. I remember 2004. If you remember, you should remember that. Interview made by Mr. Saakashvili to newspaper Izvestny, in which he said that I'm looking into Putin's eyes and I see no friendship and trust and confidence. So shall I just raise hell out of that? People speak. Even Mr. Saakashvili can make mistakes.
That's the peculiar. Oh, of course he can. He has
but
one. But
it's good to hear from
you really compare that? You could say best infantile
I do not
statement
want to argue with you because
with a statement that NATO is the source of evil against Georgia. No. I mean,
no. I just mentioned this fact because anytime we talk about European values, NATO, European Council of Europe, I look at this young, bright gentleman, Georg Handelat. It's just about not Europe and NATO. It's squabble between me and him in the presence of Europeans and Americans. So let's just
Europeans are not scared by debate. They're scared by
don't be focused on the statement or remark of one individual who has his own ideas. That's my point.
All right, so I know we're a little over, but one last question from the woman on my left.
My name is Tamara Chergolishvili. I represent Tabula Media. My question goes to Mr. Krasner. To defend its NATO allies is America's biggest, the United States' biggest treaty commitment. And European security is in the biggest danger since the Cold War. NATO Secretary General goes to Washington and the President of the United States doesn't see him. What is your take on that? How should we understand that?
The first thing I should say is I'm sitting in California, not in Washington, so I can't promise to give you a definitive answer. In my view, I think the NATO-American response to what happened in the Ukraine was extremely weak. 4,000 person rapid deployment force, what is that? I think we should have put troops on the Russian border. I think we should have made commitments to provide weapons to Ukraine and Georgia. However, having said that, I think it's, since I'm not a government official, I think it's extremely unlikely that you'll have further NATO enlargement. And the problem is this. And we're going to talk about this a little bit in the panel this afternoon, it would be extremely risky for the Russians, for Putin, to actually overtly attack a NATO member state, that is the Baltic states. He could not be certain about what the American response would be, even though the local balance of power would favor Russia, and therefore I think he would be extremely reluctant to do that. However, the payoff for a successful attack against a NATO member would be extremely high. And it's the reason why I think the United States would be likely to respond, although there would always be some uncertainty. But thinking about further NATO expansion, that seems to me from an American perspective, okay, let me say a California American perspective, to be extremely unlikely. Now, it may be the case that this administration has been particularly weak, which I think is true. But I think regardless of who the next American president is, you're not going to see support for NATO expansion, because the potential, the risks of having an invasion from the Russians, although I think an invasion is not the most likely thing to happen, without an adequate American response, the risk of that is real, and there would be high levels of uncertainty. So I'm skeptical about further NATO expansion. It's why I think we have to think of alternatives which don't involve NATO membership. But don't forget, California is a long way from Washington. Okay, so yes, please.
Thank you, Georgi Baramidze, the Vice Speaker of the Parliament. I just want to, in response to your remarks, I understand the logic you followed about the NATO expansion, but would it be devastating for U.S. reputation, and its reputation means a lot, I think, if U.S. says something and then forgets. For instance, when Ukraine gave up a nuclear weapon, there was a clear-cut guarantees given to them, and then now we see U.S. almost forgot that. And we have a Bucharest summit decision of NATO, which is a unique decision, that Georgia will be a member of NATO, and now we are saying it will be wise of United States, forget about this. So who will trust United States? And will anybody feel friend to United States, to such a country that is saying one thing and then tomorrow, based on some kind of convenience, forgetting about this? I think it is going to be devastating, and I think it will bring much bigger problems to the United States than take a risk to take countries like Georgia on board. If Russians will acknowledge this, that means that Russians will fulfill Putin's dream of the restoration of the sphere of influence. Is the United States ready to accept this? That means that the United States will accept other failures in international fora in terms of new security arrangements. So it's going to be not just one decision, it's going to be a snowball. So I understand both arguments are strong. I respect your arguments and honestly saying this, but I believe it's going to be more costly for the United States not to meet its own clearly given promises and not to fulfill them. And what other panelists would make of it?
Yes, I'm going to ask Mr. Whiteside to answer. So here, I am dodging. I admit I'm dodging. But one, I'm not in the government, and two, I'm not so sympathetic to the present administration. And what you really want is an answer from someone in the present administration rather than from me. So, Mr. Whiteside?
You're not getting an answer from the U.S. administration either. I'd simply take a little bit of distance from what you've said. I believe that U.S. leadership and commitment to the alliance is strong. We've seen it this week. President Obama had President Ghani in his office. There were extensive discussions, and again, the United States has recommitted itself to the success of Mission Resolute Support, which is a mission that's important to all of us in Afghanistan because so many fine Georgian officers and soldiers have been there exporting security. President Obama has reiterated time and time again, as recently as the Wales Summit, the strong commitment to European security. So I take some distance from what you've said. I understand that from California, it's quite a long, different perspective. But from the view of Brussels, We believe that this is a strong relationship. It's a cemented relationship. These are really difficult questions which have been brought up by the panel members, but I really speak now as sincerely as I can. I think that when we talk about the United States, we talk about a power that's leading this alliance and is deeply committed to where we're going, including all of the undertakings, one of which is that Georgia will become a member of the alliance.
We're going to come back to these questions in the afternoon, even harder ones maybe. So we're not going to let it just lie. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists.